Hello, welcome to Deconstructing Barbie. My name's Adam Pajoli, and I read too much into films. I do that because I meditate, and I end up thinking a lot as I'm calming my mind down, and my thoughts inevitably turn to whatever film that I've watched or show that I've watched. I have a deep interest in media and culture, and so I had to see this Barbie movie. Apparently, that's what the culture told me, since everyone was talking about it, and I made my poor girlfriend watch it too. She was a bit confused why I was pulling her to a movie called Barbie, but it is a movie about ideas. I am going to give a quick recap of my interpretation of the film, or at least one that I think is interesting. This isn't just my opinion. I know that's a weird thing for someone to say these days, that it's not just my opinion. I'm doing that as a way of talking about how philosophy is not just a opinion, but it is a creative way of interpreting things, a creation of concepts, a creation of connections. This is coming out of the philosopher Gilles Deleuze, a postmodern, post-structural thinker. And this movie, Barbie, is about postmodernism, I think. It is what I would call postmodernism gone bad. Very bad. It's frightening, actually. My girlfriend and I walked out of the film a bit unsettled by the message. The movie itself isn't bad. It's occasionally funny, occasionally even touching, but occasionally very disturbing, and the way that it portrays the masculine-feminine dynamics. I'm tempted to say that the conservative outrage is overblown, just like the liberal lauding of this film as great art is overblown. But I think it's, in a way, both. It's definitely a high-minded film about ideas, and it is a frightening one, because the ideas are not handled well. But I have to give the filmmakers credit. Everything is pretty good in the film as far as filmmaking craft goes. But they don't know what they're doing as far as ideas go. But I can't blame them, because the masculine-feminine dynamics of our culture are very confused. Nobody knows what's going on or what to do about it, usually, in general. Especially filmmakers. The rom-com has gone through so many transformations. It's been deconstructed within the genre, even. But this is playing a bit too much into the expectation to subvert expectations of some kind of subversive film. We have expectations that it will be some kind of subversion of the genre. I don't even know if it was supposed to be a rom-com. Is that the genre? What is the genre? It is kind of genre bending. It's a bit meta, but it's not what some would term meta-modernism, which is a kind of return to sincerity with some kind of postmodern incredulity, some kind of self-reflexive critique. This is very much a self-conscious critique. It's very self-referential to culture and pop culture, but it's not a good message. And I'm not going to echo the conservative complaint that it's just man-bashing, though it is, I think, a bit strange when it comes to its attitude towards men. But there's some deeper things going on that are much more interesting. So I will just try to paint a way through the plot using those themes of the masculine and feminine dynamics. There's some other things going on in the film as well. I think actually the better part of the film is the mother-daughter relationship. If you haven't seen it, don't bother, or watch it. And I'm going to spoil it, and I'm going to give you a new way or a different way anyway of seeing this film. So the mother-daughter relationship is interesting, or at least touching. You get to see the way that parents and children can grow apart and why, and There's a touching moment with Barbie looking at an older woman and acknowledging death and the beauty of age and time, and all that's well and good. But the heart of the film is really a anti-Platonic. Okay, this sounds too high-minded, right? But it's so obvious, right? So Plato famously, ideal forms, models, dolls is short for model, right? So coming to life, right? So we have this breakdown between the ideal realm of the model and the copy. In Platonic terms, our world is the world of lesser copies, right? We are just shadows of these higher forms that are more perfect. And there's even a theme that reminded me of Plato's Symposium, where Barbie says, "We don't have sexual organs." And Ken says, "I've got all the sexual organs." Now, this is probably just a throwaway joke, but it feeds into some of the themes. Not having sexual organs is maybe more of like the Christian version, where they're angels, right? They're angelic archetypal beings without the imperfection of sex and death. But in Plato, in Symposium, they talk about the original humanity having both sexual organs, and this is a way into them different people in the story in Symposium talking about love, and a way of them talking about higher forms of love. But in the lower forms of love, as Socrates puts it in Symposium, there's just this longing for the other that eventually becomes the adoration of the beautiful and the good and the true. But that desire that we have for the other, that comes from our not having both genders, being imbalanced, is an important way, I think, of reading this film, because here we have these perfect beings in this perfect world. But is it so perfect? No, it's not. Ken is miserable. He just wants to love Barbie. So he's already, in a way, imperfect. She's perfect. She's happy. She only gets pushed into the hero's quest of the film by the intrusion of imperfection from the real world, from this mother and daughter and their problems, and they're struggling with death and darkness, imperfection, the stain on the beautiful archetype. And then so she goes out on her quest, and Ken comes with her, right? But Ken finds the patriarchy in our world, and he brings it back to Barbie world. And this is where a lot of the weirdness comes in, is that he makes a patriarchy that supposedly mirrors the patriarchy of our world, but he's miserable. And he says this. He says he's only doing, and it's obvious. And the weird thing about the film is that it starts to make some critiques that it just completely reverses, right? So it suggests, through showing Ken's emotions and his desire for Barbie in really sincere ways, it makes you really sympathize with him. It doesn't follow through with that at all. It actually, I think, doubles back on Barbie's cruelty to Ken. In the end, they reverse things and turn it back into a matriarchy where the Kens are repressed, more or less. It's ridiculous, I think. I just don't see how they thought that was a good way to do it. So eventually Barbie goes back to the real world. And then she becomes imperfect. And what she does is she goes to her gynecologist. Now that she has sexual organs, what are they for? Well, they're no longer for procreation. And this is how the film started, right? We have Barbie appearing like the monolith of 2001 to these children playing with dolls as a way of practicing being a mother. So in a way, they're their femininity, of course, tied up traditionally with child rearing, now is going to be tied up with all these different archetypes that Barbie represented, being all these things in the world, being Barbie can be any job. So it's the woman going from being a traditional child rearer mother into being a consumer and a worker, both, right? They go hand in hand. But this movie is making the transition not from traditional to modern woman. Women were a bit late to the modernity, right? They were kept in the home for quite a while as modernity was going on. But it's their eventual access to modernity, to modern life, and in a full way, and being able to join the workforce in a more or less equal way, and have the same kind of buying power and work access that men do, was a bit late to the game. And it actually kind of corresponded with pretty close to the beginnings of postmodernism after the war. So in a way, they were already kind of late to the game as things were changing, and so men are already kind of shifting away from that, and then we're all shifting away from that now, men and women. And so I think the whole socioeconomic dimension of this is especially confusing for people. But what this film does is give us where we're headed in a very frightening way, because now sexual organs are not for sex and procreation, and then there's that second level where we kind of try to annul sexual difference, or in sex everything becomes a kind of equal partnership where there's no real difference. It becomes about masculine desire, right? Which is, I would say, a more masculine thing. And traditionally, desire is masculine, and feminine is the reception and embodiment of that desire. In the modern world, we've kind of tried to eliminate the feminine, the receptive. Everything, especially in capitalism, everything's about getting your desire. So everything becomes masculinized. Everything becomes externalized. The home is even turned into another dimension of the capitalist panopticon, as Foucault talked about. And so he called that second tier from traditional sovereign power into disciplinary power, the disciplinary society. Now what we're moving into is what Foucault's friend Deleuze called control society. So it's just a way of talking about this shift from power working through enclosure. The women were enclosed in the home for quite a long time. Now they're free. Free to what? Well, as control society, we're all controlled not through enclosure. We're free to go and do whatever we want. But that access is limited and controlled through codes, through the codification of all these flows. Not through, you have to believe this, you have to be here, go anywhere, believe anything you want. But the whole network is controlled in a technocratic sense. We're moving into a technocratic era where at the end Barbie gives her sexuality, displays it for her gynecologist to tell her what to do with it. Now, I'm not against gynecologists or doctors, but as we've seen lately in the last few years, the medical gaze, as Foucault called it, is becoming an important aspect of the control society. And this wouldn't have been so strange in the film if Barbie and Ken had achieved some kind of if not romantic sexual union, as we expect from the romantic genre, at least some kind of understanding or equality. But equality, again, is that's the disciplinary model, and we're moving away from that, and now it's something else. Equality seem to matter anymore, or it's about reversing hierarchies, right? And this is the conservative complaint, and this is what they think of as postmodernism, is that it's a reversal. But it's strange in the movie because we saw a reversal. Barbie Land started off as a reversal. The women are all in charge; they hold all the power. The men are just secondary. But then you would think that, you know, that reversal would then turn into some kind of better system, some kind of equality, or that would be my expectation from a Hollywood film. No, we see the Ken comes back and he turns it into our world, and then the Barbies turn it back, and they do it by playing the Kens against each other. And this is where there's an interesting insinuation. Basically, we know, and Ken tells us, that he's really only doing this because he felt repressed, that Barbie didn't give him love and attention and respect. And so he's doing it in a way just, as a substitute for her love. And then she teaches all the Barbies to pit them against each other through jealousy so that they fight each other. And so there's an insinuation that a lot of men's wars are a substitute for the lack of love that they are able to secure with women. And so I think there's an implication here that men and women both are responsible for men's wars. Like there's an inability for us to come together and understand and love each other that creates a lot of the strife and bullshit of society. But that isn't addressed really. Ken says, well, I didn't even really like the patriarchy thing anyway. I really just want to be in this home with you. I want to be with you. That she's like, and that's fine. Like, okay, she doesn't love this guy or doesn't love men, whatever. But the movie is about masculine and feminine dynamics, and even if this particular woman didn't want this particular man, or what are we given here? So that what we're given is an aspect of postmodernism, which is it is a kind of collapse of the ideal into the reality and singularity of individuals in the real world. So Barbie, at one point in the movie, Barbie says to, the woman who was playing with Barbie, the mother says to Will Ferrell's CEO character, like, what about ordinary Barbie? And he says, terrible idea. And then his assistant says, but it'd make money. And they're like, great idea. I wonder how true that is to this film, because I feel like that's the idea of the film, basically. Ordinary Barbie. Kind of dumb idea. But it'll make money. But obviously the filmmakers did not think it was a dumb idea. They thought it was a great idea. And so did a lot of other people. Best script I ever read, Ryan Gosling said. So many people were like, oh, great film. Well, yeah, okay, I get it. Women don't want to be that want that pressure to be all these things that Barbie is, or whether it be beautiful or successful. How about just ordinary Barbie just being? That's a good message, right? Being is enough. Imperfection is also perfect in itself. By itself, this message is fine. It's good. But this is what I would call bad postmodernism, because it misunderstands that the singularity, the individual person, is important, not as a simple identity, not as just Barbie, just Ken, as he says, I'm Ken. So it all becomes about identity. And this is the confusion. This is what conservatives think of as postmodernism, which admittedly is an aspect of postmodern society. A breakdown of of groups and relationships into isolated individuals obsessed with their own identity. That is very postmodern, but that isn't postmodern philosophy. It isn't an ideal. It is a negative byproduct of this late stage capitalism, which is then taking all these isolated individuals and connecting them through the flows, the codified flows of the control society of technocratic capitalist states. It's not a good scenario. And so an individual just being is not about just being Ken, as he said. Or for Barbie, her act of individuation is saying no to relationships, except for the one with her doctor. It's odd. It made me feel weird inside watching it, which is sad because there were actually good moments in the film where, you know, that deeper message about like embracing change, embracing death, becoming imperfect. This is an aspect of postmodern society, postmodern philosophy, where, you know, Deleuze famously critiques the whole model copy hierarchy that Plato founded and has an influence throughout the history of philosophy. For Deleuze, the copy, or the simulacrum, the thing that is in the real world that is all full of all these complicated relationships like sexuality that create change and disrupt any kind of stable identity, is an aspect of society, especially in the postmodern era, but it's crucial to being. And so being itself is this becoming, is this confrontation with difference and who we really are. The singularity of who we are is as an event of this ongoing proliferation of relations, this transformation and co-determination of all things, not their identities, whether it be their perfect, ideal, archetypal form or their mere boring, lazy self. The capitalist society now is saying, well, that's okay too. You used to have to be a worker. You know, for women it was be a mother, be important, be a worker, or do it all. And in the movie they're like, oh well, they can't do it all, so it's okay. You know, that's what makes them just want to go back. This is the theme in the film, is that the women get brainwashed by Ken's patriarchy because it's too much. They don't want to do it all. They just want. They're willing to go back and be the conservative housewife because it's simpler. And in that sense, it is. I think they have a point that the conservative solution is not a solution. But maybe being a mother is okay, and maybe we need mothers and sex and love and even procreation. I know people were really worried about population not too long ago, but that's not really the case anymore in the first world. And what we're seeing now is people aren't having sex as much. Their gender, their sexual organs are being handed over to the medical technocracy. They're getting surgeries and rearranging all their sexuality to conform to basically their desires, but not their love, not their true desire for connection, just their obsessions with identity. Sexuality has become about identity instead of relationship, instead of love, instead of family. Now, family may be a outdated notion, and I'm not a conservative in the sense that I think that it's the answer and that we need to go back to the nuclear family. And really the nuclear family is more of a creation of capitalism. Anyway. And it has created a lot of the problems. Deleuze and Guattari actually famously say that the whole Oedipal complex that obsessed Freud was actually just more of a product of capitalism, because we are locked into these little isolated nuclear units, and so we don't have this kind of open system of like the village and the greater extended family as models. And so we get all caught up with the mother-father dynamic, and it becomes this inner tension that distorts our libido and our creative expression. But that's not inherent to humanity. It's actually a product of capitalism. So the nuclear family is not the answer. Sure, extended family, better communities are great, and they probably should be something that we're striving towards. That's the ideal, right? And the ideal is to have some kind of community and individual in cooperation. But this movie is basically not only anti-idea and anti-ideal, it's basically bad postmodernism in the sense that it's just all about the ideal of capitalist identity, technocratic capitalist identity. It's not anti-capitalist. I mean, being okay being yourself, that's great. I like that. I like that, not having to consume and be somebody is a way of kind of disrupting traditional capitalism anyway. But now we're seeing that it's not so much, that especially with COVID, that they actually want you, they don't have jobs for everybody. And it's going to be less and less of an option. They need to find something for people. So we're already working towards this model where everybody just, as the movie says, stays at home and doesn't feel like, feels depressed, but it's okay. You're overweight and you're depressed, but part of your depression is you feel like you got to be somebody. Yeah. There's a lot of pressure to be somebody, and that is a part of capitalism. But we don't want to just become just passive subjects of this technocratic state where our only important relationships are with our doctors. And that was a literal thing during COVID, right? You couldn't see anybody, but you could see. Some people couldn't even see their doctors, of course, but there were definitely examples of that where like that was the exception. It's like that's what was important. That scares me, and I think I'm not like viscerally afraid. I find it interesting, and I'm having fun critiquing this film, but I think it is something that people should be aware of, should think about while they're watching this film or otherwise, because this film it's not a bad influence in some I'm not trying to scapegoat it. It's really a reflection of what's going on in a lot of people's heads about what's next. Some people want something after postmodernism, metamodernism. Well, maybe the more cynical people call it, well, we're in hypermodernism, because it's just like, it doesn't matter what you call it. Like, we're still struggling with the problems of postmodernism. What the hell are we doing when the ideal or the archetype no longer functions as a sincere or realistic goal? When that division between the plastic the world ideal world that's become plastic and impotent no longer allures, no longer models anything to us, and the boundary breaks down. What should we do? Well, great postmodern philosophers like Deleuze would say that this is a good thing, that we can actually re-territorialize, we can actually recreate and reinstate models based on lines of flight, new creative avenues of being and becoming. We can still have ideas. In fact, we can have them in a proliferating creative explosion of dynamism that we never had before capitalism basically turned everything into liquefied all these disciplinary structures that were keeping us contained. Our imagination is opened. We can do anything and be anyone now. It's a potentially great thing, but instead we're like, it's too much pressure. Because we're still thinking in terms of capitalism. We're still thinking, to be, Barbies can be any of these jobs. But just to just be anything in an internal sense, that takes a spiritual step that this movie is not able to accomplish. It tries at the end. There is an attempt to be very spiritual, which was surprising. And the spirituality is an embrace of all the imperfections of life, and it's almost touching at that moment. But if we hadn't been exposed to a whole movie where it was about not just Barbie but Ken and the gender dynamics and relations, right? So for me, her discovery should have been was the beauty of relationships. That is kind of, we define ourselves through our relations to other things and other people. That is identity, right? And so it doesn't mean that you have to have relationships. You that's not what I'm saying. And there is a kind of pushback in this movie against women having to define themselves by relationships and just be, both Ken and Barbie being themselves first. But they can also just be in relation to the world, to their own spirit, to the earth, to nature, to God, to something other than themselves, even yourself in some spiritual sense, that's great, but we're not getting that in the movie. We're getting identity. We're getting the name. I am Ken. Ken is me. No, Ken is not you. You are the model or the copy, or both relational, creative becomings. Ideas and things. Things are ideas. Ideas are things. It's all one system of creative becoming. And each thing is a singular manifestation of everything, of its relation to everything. You're not going to get to singularity or true individuality through just being an individual, for just being a subject, a name, a person. You get there through not only disconnecting from the traditional or conditioned, inherited relationships, but by making new ones, being creative with relations. That's freedom. That's singularity, novelty. But maybe we should wait for Barbie, the sequel. Hopefully not, because I very doubt it would anywhere approach what I'm talking about. But there you have it. Thanks for joining me.